Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller, along with Mike Hightower and Mike Tolbert, and we're delighted to have you with us. And of course, as always, Mike's on Mike is brought to you by the Jacksonville History Center, where Dr. Alan Bliss and his fine staff do a great job, and also the fine donors who keep the lights on and the cameras rolling. Our guest once again today is Dr. Michael Bender, professor at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of North Florida. And for our purposes today, he is the faculty director of UNF's Public Opinion Research Laboratory. Now, we may be between election seasons, but that hasn't stopped the UNF Research Lab from polling us, to keep us rather informed of just how people are thinking about our city and those people who are in elected office in our city. Among other things, by the way, it shows that Mayor Deegan is flying pretty high, by the way, but the city council is flying a little bit low. The poll also indicated that after years of surveying, what Jacksonville voters think is the most important issue has now flipped, and we'll get into that in just a couple of moments. Dr. Bender, welcome once again to Mike's on Mike, and Mr. Tolbert, if you will, start us off.
Yeah, Dr. Bender, thanks for being back again. You're a brave soul. And before we get into any specifics tell us generally about this poll. When was it taken? How many respondents, and what were their political affiliations? And when you finish that, I've got a follow-up.
Sure. So we did this poll at the end of May, and we had 742 registered voters in Duval County. And while the makeup of Duval County is slightly more Democrat than Republican, in our sample, we got a few more Republicans, but we weighted them so that the ultimate results that you see that we put out there are reflective of the registered voter population in Duval County.
Well, it's about 2 years before the next city elections. Why'd you do a poll now?
Well, we do polls just about every year, sometimes multiple times a year, particularly if there's big issues on the agenda. I remember last year or two, we polled a lot, particularly around the stadium and that deal. There wasn't necessarily a huge issue going before council. We can argue about the immigration votes or land swaps and giveaways to UF. Sure, those things are happening. And literally tonight, actually, as we tape this, we wanted to just kind of keep our thumb kind of on the pulse of what's happening here in Duval and where voters sit. And, we're kind of at that halfway stage almost for the Deegan administration and this version of council. So we just wanted to see where voters were, and we had an opportunity, and we took advantage of it.
Well, Dr. Bender, it's good to have you back. In your recent polls, crime has historically been what people care the most about. But in your new poll, says that the cost of housing is now number one. Housing concerns was twice that of crime, 25% to 12%, which is pretty significant for those of us who have been watching crime statistics for years. Is that because crime is no less a concern, or is it more because people are in a panic about property taxes, high cost of insurance, or worried about the economy? I got a follow up, but
I think it's probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. And I don't want to stand here and minimize the impact of crime and how important it is for all localities, particularly cities. But the homicide rate was down dramatically last year. And this year it's kind of mirroring last year's, which is a good thing, right? Yeah, it's one's too many, but we are down from off of historic highs. So that's good, right? So that's less news media leading with the shooting last night, the murders last night, et cetera, et cetera. So that helps. And that's true. But it's also true that housing costs are tremendously higher. And it's not just property taxes. Property taxes by itself came in at 8%. So if you want to add property taxes to housing costs, you're talking a third of the sample thinks one of those two things is the most important problem facing Jacksonville. And that's significant. It's not just insurance, which is crazy. And if you live in certain parts of town, almost impossible to get as you're getting kicked off of Citizens. But property taxes that have gone up, but also the rent costs that have really skyrocketed over the last several years, and just the housing market writ large. Entering the housing market for a 20-something or a 30-something is a significantly different scenario than it was just 20 years ago. And that's really where we saw a lot of the movement in the most important problem issues.
Well, a follow-up on that. Is it possible, what voters were the most concerned about the housing? Democrat, Republican, Independent?
Well, this is really one of the strange things in a lot of the polls that we do, because oftentimes there are big partisan splits on most important problem. This time around, Democrats 28%, Republicans 23%, but property taxes were 16%, right? So if you kind of put those two together, it's right there. But still, housing costs number one, and independents 26% number one. The only demographic group that didn't have housing costs as their most important number one issue was the 65 plus category. They still had crime as their number one issue, 25 to 12. It was the inverse of the rest of the sample. But other than that, every other single demographic group, housing costs was the number one answer. And that's different, right? That's not something that we've seen over the 12, 13 years that we've been doing this sort of thing. And it is really startling in a lot of ways.
Did that surprise you, Dr. Bender?
Yeah, it surprised the heck out of me. Housing, we have asked this question in a variety of different ways over the years. This version, we had a list of options, 8 or 10 options, and people could choose, or they obviously had the opportunity to write in something else. And a couple of years ago, housing costs were written in as kind of an important issue. And so now we've started adding that to our list. And even when we did this, I guess in 23 and early 24, it was still, it was double digits, but it was like 10, 11%, something like that. Now that it's where it's at, it's very surprising to me. And, if I stop and think about it, it makes sense. But I don't know, if I'm placing a bet on what the most important problem is, it's always going to be crime. And this time I would have been wrong.
Yeah, Dr. Bender, let's talk a little bit about Mayor Deegan now. In September of 2023, after she'd only been in office for 3 months, your poll gave her 47% approval, 14% disapproval, with 36% saying they didn't know anything about what she was doing. Now her positives are up to 61%, and just 2% say they don't know. Why the difference, especially with the don't knows?
Well, I think, really just the act of getting to know her. The first couple months that she was in office, she'd only been there a couple months that September, right? People didn't have an opportunity to see her in office, to see her executing the mayor's role. They didn't get an opportunity to know what she was about. So there was a real legitimate sense of, I don't know. Now, 2 years later, time has passed. People are certainly more likely to know who she is and be able to give an informed opinion. It's also true, and this might be a little bit of inside baseball, that there could be a mode effect there. That September poll, a lot of that was done on the phone. And when we talk to people on the phone, you're more inclined to get people saying don't know, as opposed to a text to web or an email survey, which is the mix that we used in this most recent survey in May that had, the online component to it. So people aren't necessarily talking to somebody individually. They can just do it on their phone or do it online.
Yeah. I want to kind of go back to what Miller was talking about a little bit ago. These Republican members of the council who are constantly sniping at the mayor. And I kind of call it playing a poor game of gotcha. Should they look at this poll and figure out that it isn't helping them and it's really probably very damaging to them?
Yeah, it's certainly not helping them. And I think, particularly in local elections and even in federal elections, that gotcha stuff for the average voter, it really doesn't hit home. Yes, your base red meat sycophants that are all on for you. They're going to be excited and yeah, they're going to get the libs and all that stuff. And same deal from the other side. Like, I don't want to pretend like this is just Republicans. Democrats do this stuff too, but it is not a productive means of governing. And it's not even really a productive means of attempting to win elections either. This is not the stuff that gets you over the finish line, right? People are voting for you as opposed to, oh, they there's one weird gotcha thing because somebody's staff member did something. Nobody cares about that, unless you're really on the inside, in which case you've already determined who you're going to vote for, and it doesn't really matter anymore.
Dr. Bender, Councilman Salem is talking about running for mayor against Deegan and Mayor Deegan in 2027. Based on these poll results, how would you advise him about his current chances, and what would you suggest he do to improve how he's being perceived by voters?
Well, we didn't poll it directly on his awareness and his likability and his approval. But we did, obviously, on the mayor's, and hers was pretty high. So if you're a challenger, whether you're Ron Salem or somebody else, you have a hurdle to climb. And I'm saying that because, right, if you're the incumbent, you've already won. So clearly you've shown you can get 50% plus one in this district. But it's also true that, you need to come up with an alternative. Why we need to change tracks and do something better, and what is your vision for the future, and what does that look like? We haven't really seen that from him. And again, right, we're 2 years away. I don't want to less than 2 years, I guess, if we're talking about the March election, but we're still a ways out. But he would need to do that, and he would need to yes, he's been on council for a while. Yeah, he's been council president, all those things. But he would really need to do some work to get some name recognition. And as a challenger, that can be difficult. And one way to do that is with money and flooding the airways. We'll see if he's able to come up with that and do that effectively.
Mike is a lone Republican on this group. Did it surprise you to see that the Republicans on the council got worse ratings from Republican voters than from Democrats?
Well, I'm not surprised, and have to just tell you, it's pretty damn disappointing. Here's my observation. We talked about the gotcha and the sniping, whatever the hell you want to call it. But this is Hightower's observation as one of the old curmudgeons. I think their partisan ambitions have clouded their public policy responsibilities, resulting in what I think some of us old guys would call the disease called voter awareness tone deafness. I think when you look at the issues, they're just missing the mark. But I think Jacksonville, being a small town, they expect when you get elected that you start being a Jacksonville City Council person. I just believe that the partisanship is hurting them, but it is hurting their chances. And the part that they don't seem to understand is the voter is more attuned what's going on. Social media, call it is what they want. They're more attuned of what the issues are that are important to their family, to the quality of life. And I think they're misunderstanding it totally. The part that I think they better listen to when they saw your poll, and Mike Tolbert talked about this a little bit, there is a 20-point difference between this Democratic mayor and the Republican city council. And the part that I think that the Republican city council better think about is that Republican voters, according to your polls, have a more negative rating of the Republican city council than the Democratic voters. So when you talk about your base, their base is more unhappy with them than the Democratic base. And so you pair that with, we're still a minority party. This is not within, I think you would validate this. This is not within the margin of error. We're talking about.
No, it is not.
We're talking about valleys and mountains. This is a cliff to climb. And yes, and it's really not 2 years out. When you think about it, it's not that far off. And then the last thing I'm going to just tell you that really upsets me as a former party chair is that only 3 members of this Republican city council I want them to hear this. Only 3 members of the Republican City Council have stepped up to assist the new Republican Party leadership in getting the party put together. And so, so what happens is none of them, there was only 3 out of 15 have come over and said, how can I help the Republican Party get there? Now, I can tell you, when it gets down and they're not helping the grassroots, they're not helping the party grow. So in 2 years, as Mike Tolbert says, when they go out there, when those people come to the Republican Party, to the grassroots and say, I want your help, I'm not going to be the only one that says, what have you done to help your party of late? So they got a mountain to climb. They've got it within their own party, but they got to get their act together.
Sheriff Waters had 64% approval, and the state attorney, Melissa Nelson, had 61%, also doing well in your poll. Given the sheriff's current approval rating, with voters saying crime is no longer the highest concern, might that push him to go ahead and throw his name in the hat for 2027 as mayor? Or is he going to wait for an open seat? Mike, what do you think?
Well, I mean, A,
Dr. Bender?
Does he want to be mayor, right? That's a question that he can answer. But B, if you're a strategic politician and you're looking at where you're at, why not take the bird in the hand that you've got, right? There's not going to be a serious challenge to him. The Democrats might come up with somebody, I imagine, maybe. But he's in a very secure place. He's won election, technically, I guess, re-election after he had that weird little short run in the winter before the March elections. But he's the incumbent. Things are relatively well as far as the public perception of them, even though there's been some real problems, particularly in the jail in the most recent months. But he seemed to have weathered those as far as him personally. So I mean, it's not a play that I would make when you can just wait 4 more years for an open seat and you don't have a particularly popular, well-known mayor who's built up not just 2 years of goodwill in the city, but really decades of goodwill, from her time on local news to her time running the Donna Foundation. She's a fabric of this community, and that's going to be a difficult race for anybody. I'm not sure why you would kind of give up the sheriff's office in that position at such kind of a low probability stake. If you're termed out of office, like maybe a city council member, maybe the options appear greater. But if you've got this opportunity to stay put, I don't know why you wouldn't.
Dr. Bender, let's get you out of here with this. I'm really curious. Take us behind the numbers. What is your number one takeaway from this poll?
Well, I think this is something that, if I'm looking at this, I'm seeing the housing costs, and that's just such a dynamic sea change from historic norms here. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, if I'm an elected official, is there a way that I can attach myself to this issue that can benefit me down the road so I can get reelected, right? If you look at what Trump was able to do in 2024 with immigration and some of the cultural issues like trans sports and those sorts of things, he attached himself to the side that enabled him to garner votes, and he connected with people on an issue, particularly the cultural stuff. Is there a way that if I'm a city council member, if I'm the mayor, that I can look at this housing cost thing and say, you know what? Yeah, this is a real problem. What can we do at the city level, understanding that there's limitations when it comes to the economics of housing markets and the value of houses, and the impact of the economy writ large, right? The mayor and the city council aren't going to change that. But what can they do on the local level? What can they do to make building houses cheaper? What can they do to improve the ability of people to maybe get loans or to build some more workforce type housing? Those are things that I might have my eye on that I can then lean into and say, hey, listen, we're trying. We know that maybe nationally the tides are against us, or maybe statewide the tides are against us, but locally we're trying to do A, B, and C to make things a little bit better for our residents.
Can I jump in just for a postscript on that, Mike Bender? Can you tell us, did you ask the
Sure,
question
fire away.
on whether in regarding housing, was it a question of affordability or was it a question of availability?
Well, I think it's both, right? Because if you've got too much available, the prices are going to come down. If you don't have enough available, the prices are going to rise. And so, I think those things work together, that supply and that demand access. And you have to look around, right? We were late to the party, and this is not just Jacksonville, across the country, kind of in that pent up demand through COVID. I still don't think that pause that happened for the development, I don't think we've caught up to it. Now, we have to think about what this looks like, from a macro level, as far as workers and the ability to build houses cheap, particularly when the governor is rating not only work sites, but work sites that are building houses, right? And they're taking the workers and sending them elsewhere. That's going to slow down the process and drive up the cost and make things more difficult.
And of course, there's always the interest rates, which we have no control over. That is all done in Washington. And that's what determines, of course, the interest that one's going to pay if they're able to get a mortgage in the first place. Dr. Binder, as always, great to have you with us. Thank you for sharing all the data and your perspective on all of this. And
Yeah,
look forward to having you back on with us again pretty soon, we hope. Anyhow, next week will be Mike's on Mike's 100th episode. And to help us celebrate, we've invited meteorologist Tim Deegan's wife, who just also happens to be the mayor, to join us and help us celebrate. We hope you'll join us to celebrate our 100th as well. Thank you all for joining us. Catch us next week on your favorite podcast platform, and take care, everybody.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.